Hello, everybody. Welcome again to Natural Freedom League. I am John Wydogen. We are at naturalfreedomleague.com. Here once again with my producer and co-host, Chill Will Keller.
What's going on, brother? How you doing?
Doing good.
Awesome.
Back again. Another great conversation. Today we have a fellow One Great Work Network uh, content creator, Patricia Lager. Hello, Patty.
Hi, how are you? Hi, Will. Hi, John.
How's it going?
I'm doing great.
Excellent.
Yeah, we're doing really good. I came across your work on the One Great Work Network, looking through the content creators, and found found your videos to be very informative and along the lines of things I'm interested in. So definitely wanted to have you on and talk about your experience with natural health and natural law. So why don't you tell us, first of all, about how you came to get into the medical field?
Well, that's a lot. That takes me way back. I was in undergrad. I think I followed the desires of my mother to have a doctor in the family, and that's really where it all began. She wanted me to be a physician, and I always loved the sciences. So I just was the dutiful daughter, and was a pre-med student in undergrad, went straight into medical school, and it was kind of there that as you come to grow as a human, you kind of learn about yourself. And I've always been kind of the person that wanted to do the least damage, the least harm. And I really thought that's where medicine was, the Hippocratic oath, first do no harm. And come to find out, harm is usually number one option when it comes to treatments. And I couldn't align with it. It was really hard for me to see the reaction of the drugs and the surgery when I knew that there were more simpler means to help these patients heal. So, I remember in medical school, we had to get the hepatitis B vaccination series, and my roommate became incredibly ill. She was out for a month, and, now she has an autoimmune disorder. Of course, all of my old medical school friends have unfriended me on Facebook because I speak out against what they do. But I just couldn't align with it, and I ended up leaving medicine altogether. I then you know completed a master's degree, and it was getting into my PhD work in immunology, and all of the animal research that too really bothered me. So I just kind of walked away from everything, and I just thought to myself, perhaps I should have completed those programs and become more integrated. But I felt like this. I don't know. I knew I was a person that was at the time easily influenced, and I didn't want to go down a path that might have directed me to do something that I would feel sick to my stomach if I hurt somebody. I don't like hurting animals, and I definitely didn't want to hurt any humans with the treatment options that were available. And, I did find out that doctors really are kind of tied to those treatments they learn about. They, they can't use natural means and have a license, and the license controls them. So by stepping out of it and not being licensed, and actually eventually finding naturopathy and not being a licensed naturopath, just being someone that offers educational advice, that's kind of what I do. Now, I do have a full-time job where I teach at a college, but on the side, I work as a naturopath using the health knowledge I had gained, plus other types of health modalities that I've learned along the way.
That's awesome. Very, yeah, it's amazing what the whole field, the medical field, what it's like nowadays. It's inverted. It's completely just ass backwards. And, you know, truth is simple. And, we are not separate from nature. We are a part of nature. And when you get into the medical field, and even the belief in scientism, the modern scientific fields, they everything is just misconstrued and misdirected, and they make everything so complex when in reality the answer is right there in nature, and we are a part of that, and it's simple and straightforward, so, and even obvious at times, right?
Yeah, my personal mentor, who really helped me on the natural side of health, is Dr. Robert Morris. He's a naturopath in Florida, and he simplifies everything. He brings everything down to just the basic level of the cell and the bodily fluids that surround that cell, and he looks at detoxification, which is really our natural way of getting rid of illness, getting rid of that which should not be in our body, irritation. And what we find is in allopathy and allopathic medicine is that they are suppressing those natural means of detoxification. I mean, just look at fever. I think one of the videos I put up on the One Great Work Network was the importance of a fever. And we're now finding the importance of a fever in preventing things like, cancers down the line. These childhood diseases where we provoke fever and we bring the temperature up, we're finding that when people go through that as nature intends, following natural law, letting the body do what it does, that these same people that have these childhood diseases and they don't suppress them, they're not getting these chronic diseases as adults. But those that receive the vaccination or suppress the fever, they're the ones that have the chronic illnesses. And of course, they're not making the connection because that's not what they're trained to do in allopathic medicine. There's no connection between what we're doing to children and, what diseases they develop 40, 50 years later.
Yeah, for sure. When I talk to people, and we get into deep conversation, and someone brings up the point like, oh, you think all the doctors are in on this conspiracy? And I'm saying, no, it's not about that. It's about the actual foundation, what what the foundational premise and the information that was been just instilled from the very beginning is incorrect. It's going a wrong direction, and they're just repeating the cycle and just pumping out um, these lab coats.
Yeah.
So
What was the aha moment when you're in medical school that, because even for me, being a person who questions everything, I wasn't really hip to the dangers of vaccines. My first child was completely vaccinated, and wasn't until it wasn't until California started trying to pass laws to say you had to get vaccinated that then it made me wonder, well, why? I didn't even know people could get exemptions. I mean, I was in that mode of just trusting the doctor. You do what the doctor says, and everything would be fine. And my daughter was sick a lot as a young child, and it was just told to be normal. So I just wonder, what was your aha moment where you realized that something was wrong with the allopathic perspective?
I don't think it was necessarily one moment. It was like it's a string of events. I remember um, in the 1980s, late 1980s, when I was still in high school, my cousin, her baby passed away. It was actually my second cousin, so it was my dad's cousin, but she had a young baby, newly vaccinated. And I remember hearing that this little baby was vaccinated, and then several days later, SIDS. They call it sudden infant death syndrome. And that was just a little kind of connection. I thought, that's interesting. I remember that baby getting vaccines and now they're dead. And I don't even know to this day if they've made that connection, but that always stayed with me. And then, fast forward, I remember in undergrad, it was just so interesting when the flu vaccines started coming on board in the early 90s. When I was in undergrad and I was doing undergraduate research at the medical school, um, the research person that I was working with, he's like, "Hey, everybody's getting the flu vaccine. You want to come and join me?" And I just thought, you know what? That doesn't seem like I need it. I don't think the flu is that dangerous. I'm not afraid of it. And I think I'll take my chances with the flu because it was new. I didn't really trust it. There was just like this little inner voice. And then I get to medical school. I did get the hepatitis B vaccinations because that was required for all people in medical school. But saw my roommate get really sick. So that was like the third little inkling, like, hey, something's not right here. And then my third year of medical school, I actually did an internship because I was looking for something else. I was getting really down and depressed with medicine at that time. And that's where I was like 1 foot out of the door at that point. And I found a medical doctor up in New Jersey. His name is Joel Furman. He does work right now with a lot of holistic health, but he was doing water fasting to help heal chronic diseases. And I thought that was fascinating. I just gave him a call. I'm like, hey, I'm a med student. Can I come and hang out with you for a while? And that's when he really went into something called natural hygiene with me. And he had tons of books on vaccinations and their dangers. And I was just reading this just nonstop. And I thought, I never really thought about this. It's not, and this was the 90s. This was when everybody thought vaccines were innocuous because pretty much back then, there weren't a lot of negative effects from the vaccines. Not like there are today, where children before the age of 6 have 70 vaccines or close to it. And we're just seeing, I mean, lots of negative issues arise from that. And I think there's more to come that we're not even aware of because the baby boomers, they are in pretty good health considering, but they weren't as heavily vaccinated. And, people our age, well, people my age, um, I wasn't that vaccinated as a child. So, it's kind of, it's hard to know what's going to come from all of this. But, this vaccine being the golden ticket, it's really scary to think that we as humans are so deficient that we need to be provoked um, in such an invasive way to create immunity against something we can already do without that. I mean, having again childhood diseases is a foundational, important um, initiation, really. And in some cultures, they look at these childhood vaccinations as sacred, as something that the child goes through to become a man or a woman, and they gain like a strength about them. So and that's kind of where I get into the spiritual aspect because we're missing a lot of that in medicine. Medicine is so mechanistic, it's so materialistic, and they don't look at life. They study cadavers, they study things outside of the body, looking at blood that's been taken from the body, but it's not in the body with that vital essence, because we really don't understand how the blood works really in its sacred flow. So I know I kind of went off track a little bit, but there were so many things that helped me understand that this did not seem right. And then I just started trusting that inner guidance and had to walk away from it.
Mm. Yeah, it's good to listen to that voice inside, right? The conscious, the higher self talking. Um, I wanted to interject on where I think the split in history happened is with Einstein and Tesla, and the the public or the industry went with the non ether materialistic and atomistic worldview, right? Where everything is just about matter, and they totally pulled the energetic out of there, the ether, the spiritual, and it's been eradicated. And it only takes just a few generations to pass by where there's a new standard now, like you were saying with the baby boomers. They didn't, very small amount of vaccinations. Well, now the newer generations, once the baby boomers are, their time has come and they're gone, there's a new standard now, and it's 60, 70. That's the new bar. It's crazy.
It's so scary. And even, I'm a college professor as my full-time job, but I started teaching in the late 90s. And in that time frame, even students are requiring more educational services. They have more disabilities. There's more anxiety. I have so many students that need, special places to take their exam because they have so much nervousness. And I bring this up at faculty meetings. I'm like, why are students every year becoming more and more anxious, becoming more socially inept? And they don't have answers. They're like, oh, we've got services for those students. Something's wrong and we're not noticing it.
Hmm.
Or somebody's saying it's okay for this to be this way. It's quite scary.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
internal confusion, right? 'Cause when you don't know yourself and on the principles and how your body operates and your psyche, then you're just confused all the time, which is going to throw you into a fear-based consciousness. So that's definitely prevalent.
Yeah, I was always I was pretty heavily involved with the health freedom movement in California. It's really how I got into my activism, and then was listening to Mark at that time and kind of understanding natural law and anarchy, and kind of developing that philosophy alongside, trying to take political action, and protesting, and going and speaking to your representatives, and going that route. And the one thing that I always found fascinating, once I kind of learned through I would say it was learntherisk.org. This woman started this organization where she just put out all the studies that showed the dangers of vaccines, and she was definitely like an abolitionist, right? Compared to, there's sort of like two wings of the anti-vaccine movement. It's like the abolitionists, and then you have the choice, right? It's about choice. And people who are abolitionists, they're like telling you like, no, they're poison, like they're gonna they're, you don't need them at all, right? And then the people who are more about choice, they're like saying, well, maybe you might want one, or you think one is better. But from what I understood, they were just all bad. But it was really amazing to see the marketing job that had been done, and how ingrained in people's mind that this is what health is. And the COVID um, fiasco is a perfect example. I mean, when it first happened, I was thinking, does nobody know how their immune system works? It's like everyone thinks, I mean, how does my mom, who's like, in her 70s, not understand that you're supposed to get germs, you're supposed to get sick? George Carlin, the great comedian, he has whole bits on this, talking about that, this is what your immune system is for. And yet we've been marketed into a place where people believe that immunity comes from a pharmaceutical product. you know it's a masterful job on their part. You actually, have to kind of give them credit, if it weren't so evil, that they've really convinced everybody that we are diseased and we are all going to die unless we take these products.
And yeah, that's the foundation of Rockefeller medicine. Back with the early 1900s with the Flexner report, where they basically outlawed all other modes of healing other than allopathic medicine. So we used to have an equal number of homeopathic medical schools and naturopathic medical schools. Those were all kind of done away with. And drug medicine became the only medicine. So by intermingling with the law and having that control, the Rockefellers, with their ability to sell these chemical drugs, which come from other sources like big oil and whatnot, and their um, whatever they have left over from that they use as chemical drugs on the masses. But the pharmaceutical companies are shady as all get out. I mean, the things they do to get vaccines approved. I've read so many different books where I'm just appalled at how they get away with it, and they continue to get away with it. And people are not standing up and screaming. I mean, when I read these books, I think, how can people not be angry? I mean, even with the COVID vaccine, do you know when they were testing, and I can't remember which of the pharmaceutical companies it was, but their control was, instead of a saline solution, as all controls should be, when you inject saline, nothing happens. That should be your standard control. They're using another vaccine as the control.
Hmm.
They're using the meningitis vaccine, which has a whole host of side effects, and people do die from that vaccine every year. So they're saying that the COVID vaccine is safe because its adverse effects equal that of the meningitis vaccine. Now, I don't think all pharmaceutical companies tested with that control, but they probably did other shady, unethical controls other than saline, as it should have been. So the things that they get away with and the way they get things approved, and the fast track of this whole vaccine in the first place should have been a red flag for everybody. But this is something that I think we're going to see a lot of negative effects from, and it's going to be kind of scary what we're getting into.
Yeah. It's amazing, people are conditioned, and that statement right there is really hard for people to hear because they immediately have a reaction and they get defensive, but it's true because it's so many times I've had conversations and I observe people saying that they think that the allopathic way is the only way, right? And they've kind of put this dogma on anything that's holistic or natural, like it's just woo woo. It's herbalism, oh, tinctures, oils, any of that stuff. They put it all in a box that's just woo. And it comes down to ignorance. So whatever they've been told is what they believe and they run with.
Right.
So, and it's weird we're seeing right now with the whole COVID. It's like popular culture to get the vaccine. It's cool to get the vaccine for the majority of people. I'm not saying it is, but yeah, I think it's ridiculous. But we're seeing this in just culture itself. So
Well,
it's
it's the
crazy.
programming, right?
Yeah.
Bernays was the father of this type of programming with, getting women to smoke back in whatever it was, the 1920s or something. I mean, people are so easily manipulated. As Mark Passio states, we are a programmable species. And it's just like input, output. And they know the formula. They know how to control the masses. And I'm just glad that I haven't fallen victim to that programming, fortunately.
Yeah.
At least maybe I am slightly. I don't know. I mean, you don't know what you don't know, but I'm hoping that I'm coming out of whatever programming had me when I was very young.
Yeah. I don't know if you ever watched The High Wire with Del
Mhm.
Bigtree.
Yes.
Yeah, he broke down that basically every vaccine on the market, none of them were placebo safety tested. He has actually a whole diagram that he laid out because each one would be compared to the previous one, and he just laid it all out that like none of the ones on the childhood schedule have ever been tested against a placebo. It's been admitted by Stanley Plotkin under oath. And their argument, this is that mind control and that trickery. Their argument for that is that it would be unethical to not give the person a vaccine because vaccines are so great. It would be unethical to do a study where you're giving somebody a vaccine and then you're not giving the other person some type of you're leaving that person unprotected. So that's how they um justify that action, because you're right, every other pharmaceutical drug, it has to go under the gold standard of a placebo safety test. And this is down to Viagra. I mean, Viagra, I think they tested for like 10 years before it got on the market, before it got approval. You look at the Hep B drug, it was tested for like a few months. I mean, they don't even test them for longer than a year. So it's interesting, just for a little perspective from my point of view, in being involved in California, where we were sort of the front lines of the battle of, mandatory vaccinations. I kind of always had the sense that we were stuck in a dialectic. that they wanted this debate to go on, and it's part of the programming. It's part of vilifying people who don't want to take it. It's
Yeah.
part of vilifying, the idea of your rights. And it was a part of conditioning into this collective public health, social responsibility concept. And I think that what they did with COVID, the COVID vaccine, is they sort of it's like the impression of transparency, right? So everything is happening in front of you, and now they'll talk about it, but they talk out of the side of their face, and um but it's all out front now. So now you can see the narrative has already changed to where the people who were pro-vaccine, who used to say vaccine injury is like so rare, it's so rare, it hardly ever happens, to now they're saying it does happen, it is a reality, but it's better than catching the disease,
For the
but
greater good, right?
exactly. And that's where you get all these people with their cards. I'm doing my part. I'm out for 3 days with chills and, a fever, but I'm doing my part for the greater good. When in reality, there's no evidence that it prevents spread. There's no evidence it prevents infection. Even Fauci says himself, um, it's only preventing clinical disease. So it's lessening the how sick you are, basically. But these people just keep going along with it. I mean, I was with some family this weekend, and they were talking about, well, yeah, it makes it to where even if you did get it, then you'd have less symptoms, and it's just like,
The symptoms are there for a reason. That's the foundational knowledge people need to understand. We need these symptoms because they're part of the detoxification experience. The fever, I mean, having a fever of 105, first of all, you have to be actually pretty strong and healthy to elicit such a high fever, because it takes a lot of internal fire and energy to bring your bodily temperature that high. But it's burning off residue, it's clearing debris, it's activating your metabolism so that you can clear out and open up the channels of elimination more effectively. I mean, we need this. Our bodies need these symptoms, and it's completely healthy. I mean, the last time I actually had the flu was in 2012. And at that time, I was in a band. I was, singing a couple times a month, and I was just really overdoing it myself. And my temperature was going up, and I was into nature. I was, doing the natural health thing. But I remember my temperature got up to 104, complete body aches. And I'm thinking, this is really awesome. I haven't had a fever this high in a while. And I water fasted for a complete 24 hours. And then the next day, my temperature came down. I actually went to work. You just get through it. And I know other people that were going through the flu at that time. They were sick for 2 weeks, but I let my body experience the detoxification. And if you let your body do what nature wants it to do, you heal more effectively. You're not going to probably get sick chronically over and over and over again. You're protecting yourself from more chronic diseases from the suppression and pushing in that those suppressive drugs do to the body, because they don't let you heal completely. So, I when people tell me that it's reducing your symptoms, I'm like, that's the stupidest thing you could ask for. You need those symptoms. And I apologize if it angers me, but I hear people say these things all of the time. And I want people to heal, because it's your God-given right to live a life of optimal health.
Yeah, well said. Humans, we like I was saying earlier, we're not separate from nature. We're part of a larger ecosystem, and a good portion of us, of our bodies, is bacteria, and we're constantly, our body's constantly communicating with the environment around us. And this is what symptoms do. It's a form of communication. Even what people call viruses is almost a form of communication on a cellular level. So when you start getting sick, even seasonal issues, right? That's just your body communicating with you, telling you what you need to do, and you should listen and take the proper steps to detoxify.
Yes.
And it's, and there's always, with modern medicine, the allopathic medicine, it's just always the band-aid. Take the magic pill, it's cover the symptoms, so the issue goes away. It's just turning the blind eye, which ultimately creates deeper issues and long-term issues as well.
Mhm. That is correct. Yeah, you got it.
Yeah, I looked up the definition once of allopathy versus homeopathy,
Mhm.
and it said that homeopathy is, kind of natural, um, herbs or things you take that mimic the symptoms of a disease.
Mhm.
And allopathy is a medicine you take that gives you different symptoms than the disease gives you. I
Yeah.
thought that was really interesting. And, James Corbett does a really good reporting on the takeover of the pharmaceutical and the medical industry by Rockefeller. And he talks about how allopathy was the snake oil salesman, right? Back in the day. I mean, they were the ones, they're like, they're like, chop your arm off or like go in and do some invasive surgery. And homeopathy is just, here, take this, little, herb or root or bark or something that we've broken down to its essence, and then, take it and, kind of like, it's a more naturopathic perspective, so
Mhm.
I wanted you to kind of define, what does it mean to be a traditional naturopath?
Well, it's working with the tools of nature. I mean, naturopathy has been the name that we've given to it lately, I think, in the last couple of 100 years. But I mean, even the shamans that knew, and the shamans have been around our planet for, thousands of years. And they just kind of had a clairvoyant knowing of what plant would heal what condition. And because they were more in tune with spirit, and they were not preoccupied with the mental chatter that we tend to be preoccupied with today. But there's a lot of traditional knowledge that has been passed down from those shamans in South America. Actually, they were all over the country, or all over the world. I apologize. But, we know that plants do have intrinsic ability to help us heal. But, really it comes down to just getting away from all that is unnatural. And when you align with nature, your body heals and detoxifies on its own, because that's what it's set up to do. I mean, I teach human anatomy and physiology. That's my full-time day job. And homeostasis is at the core of every organ system that I discuss. Homeostasis is the body's ability to maintain stable internal conditions despite lots of fluctuations. Temperature goes up, temperature goes down, blood glucose goes up, it comes back down. Our body knows how to bring things into a balance. But with constantly, eating the wrong foods and practicing unnatural activities, watching tons of television, being exposed to radiation that's not natural, these things bring us out of balance constantly. And when we stay out of balance for long periods of time, then that promotes, a more chronic disorder. So it just comes to finding out what is natural, a diet of, plants, primarily plants that are in their natural state. They haven't been adulterated with chemicals like glyphosate during their growing, and, having wonderful relationships in your life where you're not overly stressed, getting proper sleep, getting sun. I mean, what has been more demonized than the sun, right? We're told to, cover up. The sun is so healing. It gives us natural energy, and it helps with things like vitamin D production. And there's just a whole host of what the sun can do for us. So that's really what I see at the heart of nature, is just doing what is natural as a human. And I don't think humans today even know what it truly means to be a human.
I love that you brought that up, because me personally, that's my 0 point. That's my foundational principle. Is it natural or artificial? Natural meaning real. not man-made. It's here. It's part of the system, the laws of nature, right? That's been created by the higher intelligence that we are also a part of. And artificial, meaning it is man-made. It's just a mental construct. So, and we can create things that are in harmony with nature, and then we can obviously create things that are not. So that's the difference between natural and artificial. And I always, everything that I do, diet, activities, I always compare it to if it's natural or artificial. I'm really big on plants, and plants are extremely healing. They have the elements within them, and I think the shamans and the naturopaths know this, right? There's some plants that are cooling, and some are damp and wet and etc. And that whole field is true medicine in my eyes. That's how you can heal the body. It's it's simple. It's like what John and I say, right? Simplify the profound. So it's a simple, complex, but it's new to a lot of people, and I think people should definitely look into that and learn something new. So I think the problem is that humans, what's going on right now is control. Humans want to build systems, artificial systems outside of nature and beyond nature. They think that humans are the apex of creation, and that is the problem. That's where we're going to see disease, mental illness. We're going to see even larger scales of societal problems. So definitely, like you said, got to get in harmony with nature for sure.
Agreed.
So tell us a little bit about your mentors. I read in your biography you mentioned two men that you learned a lot from. Can you tell us a little bit about them?
Well, I think those two men, I'm trying to remember what I wrote exactly. Was it Robert Morse? I consider him my primary mentor.
Mm-hmm.
And, I came across Dr. Robert Morse probably a couple of years before I came across Mark Passio. And, at that time, I was, still in kind of the allopathic mindset, even though I had stepped away from it. I just didn't want to be a part of it any longer. But he had a very simplistic teaching of how the body detoxifies, and his big thing is the lymphatic system. And he loves herbs and the plant medicine as helping to strengthen and detoxify tissues. But he's a very spiritual man first and foremost. I mean, I actually was speaking with him last night, and he was telling me that he really wants to get back into a spiritual life and to dive into those, like astral projection and visiting other worlds, because that's our human right as well. But because the physical suffering on this planet is so profound, he's brought down over and over again to help people kind of break free from these really mental um, ways of controlling our whole body. And it's a belief system, and thinking that you need allopathic drugs to heal you, or you need to follow the advice of the white coat, because they can take you down a very dark path. I mean, it starts with one medication, and then you need medications for the side effects of that first medication. And meanwhile, your body and your vital force are becoming more and more drained, until the next thing you know, the only way that you can activate cellular activity is through drugs. And you're so dependent at that point. And that's where they want you, right? Because then you're a repeat customer, right? You're going back to the pharmacy month after month to refill that prescription. And Dr. Morris, he has his own YouTube channel, and he's trying to help people help others get out of this mindset and this very sick society that we all find ourselves in right now. And then was it Rudolf Steiner? Was he the other person that I wrote?
I think you said something. I think it was like
Joel.
Joel
Oh,
somebody.
Joel Furman. Yes,
Yeah.
Joel Furman. Yes, I mentioned him. Yeah, because I guess a real mentor that I had meant. Joel Furman, I worked with when I was in medical school. He was a natural hygiene physician, meaning that he was using water fasting to help his patients heal. And I went up to New Jersey and stayed with him for about 3 or 4 months while I was in medical school. And I saw some profound healing under his guidance. One man in particular, he was refused by his insurance company for his fourth cardiac bypass surgery. They're like, no more, you keep clotting up these blood vessels again. We're not going to pay for another surgery. So he found Dr. Moore or Dr. Furman, sorry, and Dr. Furman put him on a water fast. And I think when I showed up, he was probably already 30 days on nothing but water, but he cleaned out his blood vessels. I mean, completely cleaned out the clots with no invasive surgery. They didn't have to, think about the process of cutting open the thoracic cage, opening up your chest to get the heart, and taking a blood vessel from like your leg and, replacing the occluded vessel. I mean, that's how crazy we look at treatment when you could do something of just not eating, just drinking water and letting nature clean out that mess. I mean, that's what nature does. And, when you do fasting, and water fasting is the most intense type of fasting because you're getting rid of everything. You're just letting your body's own natural mechanism of digesting, which shouldn't be there in your tissue spaces and blood vessels, digesting it away. Your body knows how to remove things. We just often get in the way of our body removing things, so they just stick around forever. And so, yeah, Joel Furman really taught me a lot. Unfortunately, he became a little bit mainstream, and now he has a PBS show, and he's been on Dr. Oz. So he's now promoting kind of the more, I guess, acceptable way of healing. He still promotes a plant-based diet, but I don't think he does water fasting any longer. But there are other natural healers that do help with water fasting if somebody wants to do that in a supervised way, which I think is good because, after 10 days of doing nothing but water, you can have some symptoms, and it's good to be checked up on to make sure that your electrolyte levels aren't going too off. So you
Yeah,
want to take things slowly when you do water fasting.
absolutely. The human body is the ultimate technology, right? And
Mhm.
it's amazing. Even with fasting, it's the body always wants to regulate itself and then repair itself. So ultimately, it's just flushing out all the decaying issues and the compromised issues within your body, and then bam, you got a fresh system.
Yeah.
Everything's kind of jump started. Um, so there's so many modalities that can be utilized, and so yeah, that's a good point that you were mentioning.
Yeah. And Dr. Morse, I think he likes water fasting as well, but his perspective of it is that people these days are so sick that water fasting would be too intense of a
Hmm.
healing reaction. Because people do, when you detoxify, you have kind of this Herxheimer reaction, where as you're kind of removing and getting rid of all of the toxins you're breaking down, you have to release it. And if you don't have those channels of elimination open, um, there's an overwhelming kind of release that gets stuck somewhere, and then that can have its own problems. So, using herbs to help strengthen these organs and tissues, and even simplifying your diet, doing more fruits, more greens, that could be detoxifying as well. So there are ways to approach it in a slower mechanism so that you're not overwhelming your body as you detoxify.
Great point, for sure.
One time I did the lemonade fast. Have you
Hmm.
ever heard of that?
Yes.
Where it's like you make lemonade with like purified water. You make the lemonade. It has some type of maple syrup in it, and then you do like a saltwater cleanse in the morning. So
Mhm.
I did it, and I did it for 7 days, and I've never done anything like that before. And I had like all this energy, like I couldn't sleep. I was like just like up, like not up all night, but I just had a lot of energy. And then probably about the third or fourth day, my throat got really sore,
Mhm.
but I don't think I was sick. I think it was my body cleaning itself out.
Yeah.
And I've always had issues with my tonsils. I actually, unfortunately, had my tonsils removed, but they were really bad. I used to get, they called it like um, chronic, chronic tonsils or something like that. Chronic. Anyway, it just, it was like I used to get strep throat, and then I would have the same reaction as if I had strep throat just from any kind of nasal drip. It would cause this like huge swelling in my tonsils. So, but when I did the lemonade fast, my tonsils had already been removed for a number of years, but the pain was right in that area. And I hadn't felt it like that since I had my tonsils. So it was pretty interesting. But I actually felt really good, like high energy, but I was also um having some effect, some negative effects in terms of like just having a sore throat and stuff like that. So yeah, you have to be careful with that stuff, but it is pretty powerful.
It is. And, speaking of your throat, I mean, the reasons why your tonsils became enlarged every time you were having, some sort of reaction to something is because inside of your tonsils, you have lymphatic cells. They divide anytime anything irritating or foreign enters your body, and they're just naturally responding. It's like your lymph nodes get bigger when they're responding. But you probably had something congested in your throat tissue. One of the things I use when I work with clients is I do an iris analysis. I look at their iris for chronic issues, and you can pick up genetically kind of where your tissues are more depleted, where they're more genetically set up for having symptomology. So I can look at somebody's iris and know when you get symptoms, do you feel them in your throat or do you feel them in your lower back? You can kind of pick up those kind of things, but you can also forewarn somebody when they do embark on a fast, where they can expect to have those negative symptoms as you're kind of guiding them through their healing process.
That's phenomenal. You're the second person I've heard talk about that. The first one was a guest on Crow 777, and I thought it was so fascinating how she was explaining it. So that's pretty cool. Do you do that for people, for clients and stuff? Is that
Yeah.
something that you offer?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I don't have an office right now where people can come and visit me and I can take pictures of their irises. So I'm kind of dependent on them doing it with their phone. And sometimes you get pretty good pictures and
Yeah.
sometimes you don't. So you just make do. But when I get a really good, clear photo, I can pick up a lot of information. And I did all of my iridology training under Dr. Morris. He is the master of iridology, in my opinion. He is a very well trained in that field.
That's awesome.
So how did you discover Rudolf Steiner?
Yeah, so Rudolf Steiner is probably a more recent investigation of his work over the past couple of years. I first came across him, though, in around the time when I was getting into um, anarchy and learning about Mark Passio's work. I had gotten and I had actually started working with a holistic school up in Canada, and I was working teaching alongside David Wolf, and he kept bringing up Rudolf Steiner. And I remember back in like 2011, 2012, looking at Rudolf Steiner's work, and I'm like, who is this guy? I do not understand him whatsoever. I mean, he just kind of speaks in these ways that to me at that time where I was mentally, it didn't make sense. And then since then, again, things come back around and you see them again in new eyes. And I guess over the past 3 years or so, I just really have started to feel aligned with what Rudolf Steiner was saying. And, you know, and a lot of what we're going through now and what Mark Passio has taught, and like you had mentioned, John, with um, the right and left brain. And, I mentioned in one of my videos, Luciferic and Ahrimanic types of impulses that are, in the works right now to pull people off that center path. Um, Rudolf Steiner had talked about that way back in the early 1900s. And, now we're in the time of Ahriman. Ahriman is the materialistic kind of left brain pillar of that dynamic. whereas Lucifer was more of the right brain pillar of that dynamic. And both of these are taking us away from the Christ consciousness where we should be in the center. But, Steiner, just he is amazing. I mean, he was this clairvoyant kind of shaman man that just knew things. And I know, John, you've shared with me that you have investigated his works as well. But, he has a knowing like of the Lemurian and the Atlantic races of our past history as humans. And, he describes the Lemurian race as not even a physical form, but they were kind of in the astral realm. Whereas when we moved on to the Atlantic period, now we're physical. And he describes the earth as being a plant. I mean, the earth was completely a plant at one point, and now it's, we've got solid things on our planet. So I just find it fascinating, what he describes, and, how do you know if any of it is true? But, the way he speaks and what he's talked about with regards to vaccinations, even holds true today with what we're going through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Will.
Any of the view, I was just going to recommend one of his pieces, How to Know Higher Worlds. If you want to get your mind blown, just dive into that book. I mean, he's got so many that are just phenomenal.
Yeah, there's actually, I think the series goes Outline of Esoteric Science. You're supposed to read that first, and then How to Know Higher Worlds. And I think the third one is The Philosophy of Freedom, possibly, which I forget. I need to figure out which one the third one is because I've done the two. But what's interesting about The Philosophy of Freedom is he wrote that before he really got into his esoteric work.
Mhm.
And I saw something recently about him that in his early days, I think he was an architect or an engineer. He was a medical doctor on some level, and he didn't delve into the spiritual, esoteric information because it was sort of looked down upon, frowned upon. And he wrote Philosophy of Freedom back then. And what it basically does, the little bit that I've listened to it, is it ties in the human ability to think with freedom and creating freedom, and that's our natural state. But it's interesting that I think he recommends it as like the third book of an initiation, which starts with Outline of Esoteric Science, um, How to Know Higher Worlds. And yeah, it's really fascinating. I mean, he really breaks down how, he calls it spiritual science, right? And he's trying to connect those worlds that we're seeing right now. It's so divided, right? It's now scientism. Everything is material, and everything is focused on that. And he was really trying to bridge that gap by saying these things that we experience in the spiritual realm through our thinking and then our imagination and our meditating, that then we can, by sharing with each other the knowledge that we attain through those experiences, we can compare and see that like there is something to what he's saying, and what other people have experienced. And it does ring true. I mean, the things that he talks about in terms of, like you're saying, the Lemurian and the root races and where the evolution of man, and I guess you could almost look at it as the fall of man in a way. um it ties into a lot of things that I see now, even in the modern times. And I think a lot of that information came from theosophy, from the secret doctrine that which um, he was very studied in,
Mhm.
and then he created anthroposophy from there. So yeah, I'm saying you and me are really kind of on similar paths, because for whatever reason, when I finished with Mark Passio's work, it was like there was this whole new world of occult information opened up to me, and it's like, where am I going to go, and Rudolf Steiner was just the one that I felt most comfortable with.
Yeah, he's remarkable.
I
It
find
just,
it interesting too about what he says about the vaccines, when he says that they will create a way to separate people from the soul completely,
Yeah.
And he says like through medical means, but it's interesting when I read that part about what he says, because it's almost like he knows something but he doesn't say what it is. I don't know if you've noticed that in that
Yeah.
little that passage where he says they'll work out, they'll figure out means of doing this through medical procedures or something, but he doesn't. It's almost like there's something he knows, but he just isn't like divulging everything that he knows. It's pretty fascinating.
He seems like he is allowing humanity to unfold without him guiding them into any direction. I mean, I notice he does that with diet as well. He's not really prescriptive with, oh, you should eat this type of food. He talks about the effects of food, and, he's doing everything kind of from a spiritual perspective, looking at their shape, how they grow. I mean, he has a whole branch of agricultural work, biodynamic gardening, but he never really tells people what to do. It's very kind of freeing in how he presents information, which I find quite refreshing because it really holds the reader of that information in the person that, shifting it in a way to make it make sense for them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, he's kind of conveying the concepts,
Mhm.
but still ultimately, this is a schoolyard. You have to do the work. So, it's his work is just phenomenal. Yeah.
Another great thing about him is he has a respect for the different religions in a way that most people, especially modern people, don't. It's more, yeah, we reject religion, but he sort of embraces them and is sort of picking out the truths within them. And I really relate to that. I feel like that is what led me on my journey in the beginning, was sort of being raised Christian and then wanting to discover, well, what do all these other people believe and what have they been taught and what's the common bond among them all. And I think that's another really powerful part about his work,
Yeah.
tying in just like the sort of the symbolic meaning of the Christ, and the what does he call it, the event on Golgotha, or I forget what he
Oh
calls it, but
yeah, yeah.
Golgotha is where Jesus was
Right.
crucified. But he almost does it in a way where he sounds like he believes in it in a literal sense, but it's literal because it happened in the spiritual realm,
Mhm.
if that makes sense.
Right. It was
So
like a pivotal point for even human history, but yeah, it was he that's how he talks of it anyway.
right,
It was a spiritual event, and he describes humanity as actually changing at that time
right,
with what humans like they had a clairvoyant capacity prior to that moment in time, and then after that it's kind of been lost a little bit, and now we're moving on and shifting to this Ahrimanic kind of influence and impulse. So, and you can see that playing out right now.
one thing I saw in your presentation was you mentioned that the time that he sort of predicted that Ahriman would inhabit the earth was around the year 2000.
Well, that was from scholars when I was kind of reading other people's take on what he said. He said the third millennia, which I imagine is in the this time period where we are now, but he never, like with anything, he never really solidifies a specific date. But yeah, it could be right now. And a couple of scholars that study his work were saying that, he could be Ahriman, he or she could be walking on the earth with us as we, tread this planet.
Yeah,
And he was said to incarnate in the West. So Lucifer incarnated, around, I guess, was 3000 BC. Don't quote me on that. And then obviously Christ, and now Ahriman, who is Ahriman and Lucifer. I take it as kind of the two sides of the devil, or the two sides of this antithesis to the Christ impulse. And Ahriman is all about materialism and taking us away from the soul. And that brings us back to the vaccine, which, as you mentioned, as you described, it's separating us from our spiritual knowing and who we are as humans. And and it's making us robotic, programmable. And that just draws in with what Mark Passio teaches about what controls humanity and what brings us into this level of, you know, always focusing on the duality, the right versus left, political. And that's where we are as a species. So how do we unite, and how do we, prevent Ahriman from taking more control over our planet?
Yeah, awareness creates choice, right? And choice creates awareness. So you got to expand. We need to raise our consciousness, and the way we do that is by taking in knowledge and then applying it. Right? Wisdom is the application of knowledge. So it's a good time to get in front of the mirror and be honest.
Yeah.
It's almost like Ahriman is the manifestation of our shadow,
Mm.
right? It's like the shadow work like coming into manifestation. And maybe there was no way of preventing it from happening. Maybe it's just a step we have to go through. I think about that sometimes with the technology, that perhaps we had to go through these centuries of violence and war and greed and these type of values in order to develop technology to a point where then it could be used in a positive step, or a positive direction. Just kind of looking at things in terms of like everything happens for a reason, I guess. So yeah, you wish that it didn't have to happen that way, but maybe these are the growing pains that we have as a species has to go through.
Yeah, everything seems to be like a mirror, and we need the duality to know the extent of human capacity and what those two sides are, and how, who knows, in our many lives of reincarnating again and again, we've probably experienced every um, ability to be, evil all the way to sacrificing ourselves for something. So, and everywhere in between. And with the number of souls on the planet now, and who knows, what our populations have been in the past. I think a lot of our history has been obviously occulted. We don't know everything because we're not meant to know, or at least not to the powers that should not be. But um yeah, I think the human experience is, it's something we really need to talk about in a spiritual way. And John, you mentioned something about, in your works of studying, or studying the works of Steiner, about how, people discuss those dream states and what they experience, perhaps, even doing meditation, or perhaps even, I don't know if Steiner ever talked about this, at least I haven't come across it, but working with the plant medicines and going into these different realms. Are enough of us really discussing our experiences at these levels? Because I think that there's a lot of knowledge that we can gain about who we really are as a species, and what does it mean to be human.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Um, I think kind of in previous history, even working with plant medicines, people aren't taking enough. They're not prepared. Their physical body and their mental and emotionally as well. They're not prepared to dive deep into these realms to gather information and acquire assistance. And that's something that I think is kind of perverted nowadays. You can see it in the new age realm. You know, plant medicines. Everyone's taking ayahuasca, but what are they actually utilizing it with? These are tools and assistants for us to raise our consciousness and evolve. So,
Yeah, I think another a point that I wanted to make too was, you were talking, Will, you mentioned about, the where Einstein and Tesla and that divide of, kind of saying there is no ether, which is, another way of maybe saying there is no spirit, right? Another marking point of that divide is the conspiracy against hemp, and the fact that they went after this plant, so now it is looked down upon to even take any type of plant medicine to change your state of mind. They've totally demonized this one plant, and even with it being made legal now, people still look down upon it. And it's this thing that has been around for longer than man, or as long as man, but yet it's still in question. But now this vaccine that's been tested for a year with nanotechnology that's going to reprogram your cells, that's fine. You're a bad person if you don't take that, but to explore with plant medicine has been totally demonized. And again, another step towards separating us from nature and pushing us more towards this man-made artificial world of healing or anti-healing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So why don't you let us know where we can find your work? I know you have 2 websites, right?
Well, my regular website is just Natural Law Health, all together, naturallawhealth.com. I do have an educational website. I'm still working on it because I am going to be providing uh, educational courses for natural health professionals that I'm doing with Dr. Morse as part of his healing school. But I'm offering some live classes later this month. And I just want to kind of teach people the foundational knowledge so that when they work as natural healers, they'll kind of have that vernacular. But healing is quite simple, so we don't need to complex everything. But yeah, Natural Law Health is my main website, and right now I'm posting the videos when I have time to make them on LBRY. I'm still on YouTube for the time being, but we all know, that could be gone in an
Mm.
instant.
It's good to have options.
Yeah.
You're, you
Also,
s- you seem pretty nice. I don't think they'll kick you off.
Right now, I don't think I have that big of a following as of yet, so I don't think I'm that big of a threat. I use some of their scientific jargon, so maybe they think I'm okay.
we'll see how nice the AI are playing. So you never know. But you're also on the One Great Work Network, so people
Yes.
go there, check that out. Check out Patty. John and I are also on there, and but check out Patty's work, and there's some phenomenal pieces on there. So
Thank you.
I actually have one more question before we get out of here. This is sort of not, it's not a gotcha question, but I want to try to stump you. No, just kidding. I think you know what it is, but what what can you tell us about the interstitium?
Like the interstitial fluid?
They actually discovered this like pretty recently, the interstitium. It's like I saw this on the high wire. It's like it's another organ in our body
Oh,
that
like the connective tissue matrix that basically, it connects everything throughout the body, that um, interstitial matrix substance, collagen fibers, and the fluid that flows through it.
yeah.
It's the connection, and it's where macrophages, different white blood cells exist. I don't really, I haven't heard of that as being denounced or as being announced as a separate organ, but I
Yeah,
know.
so what I heard was that it's you're probably talking about the same thing. I think it's something that they were looking for, but from what I understood is when they dissect a body, because it's dead, you don't see it anymore. But that with some type of technology, they discovered this interstitium, which like covers your whole body, and basically they think that it may be your immune system. Like it may actually be like, and it's actually, if it is an organ, it's the biggest organ in our body, and we haven't known about it for like forever. So when people think that like science is settled, they're still discovering things with new technology that is actually kind of affirming what's like natural health people have been teaching all along.
Yeah, if it is that kind of interstitial matrix just kind of underneath the skin, holding the skin to the structures deep to it.
Yeah.
There are many different cells that exist there. And that's the thing, taking the body outside of its natural state, taking a living, holistic being and taking its blood out or cutting tissues out and studying them outside of the whole, you're never going to see these things. I mean, Dr. Morris found through his research from another lab, I think it was the University of Virginia, but they said that there's a lymphatic system in the brain. And when I was in medical school, we were told there is no lymphatic system in the brain, but there is. And, we see immune responses taking place in the brain.
Right.
I mean, and this is why vaccination can lead to different neurological events.
Yeah. Yeah. Now they're even saying that the stomach is like another brain, right? Like you actually, like your stomach is a brain, your heart is a brain, and your brain. So, which is pretty interesting. Again, tying it in with Steiner. I'm sorry, I could go on forever, but Steiner kind of broke down the body into like 3 areas, and then each area had like, I believe, like 7 parts or something like that. But it totally fits with this idea of the 3 brains. Then that this kind of controls the lower part of your body, this kind of controls this mid area, and this is for our higher faculties. So it's all very fascinating.
Yeah, he was a shaman, a wise man that we didn't take as seriously as we should have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank goodness he created all those works.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for that guy with the awesome voice on Rudolf Steiner Archives, because I listen to that as I fall asleep every night. Just
I'm the same.
meditation.
I'm the same. All right, Patty. Well, again, I could keep talking forever. We have a lot in common, but I appreciate you coming on, and maybe we can do it again sometime.
Yes, I'd love to. Thank you so much. Thank you, Will. Thank you, John. I had a lot of fun. So keep up your good work. And thank you for all of the great guests you're sharing with all of us.
Thanks, Patty. Appreciate you.
Thank
you. All right. Thank you, Will.
Thanks, John.
And everybody go watch Funky Fathers. He's traveling the country. I don't know if you saw that, Patty.
No, I didn't.
Check out our page, Funky Fathers. It's our buddy Mike Mattingly. I met him through the Health Freedom Movement. He's a musician, and we recorded an acoustic album for him of like, he basically has been writing freedom songs in the last year.
Music.
And it's amazing. So we have a little donation system where you donate, you get the album, and then it goes directly to him to help him. And he's going from capital to capital playing his song. So he already did the first half in August of last year. And now he's starting to do the East Coast leg of the trip. So definitely check it out.
I will. Thank you for letting me know.
All right.
Awesome.
And always remember, put something good in the air and plant something good in the earth. Peace.
We be the natural freedom league, 'cause we